man, this milk is really starting to smell. All of them, in fact, are starting to smell. And I could use my sense of smell to see that, oh god, they all smell really, really bad. But that's a qualitative observation because they smell sour, but it doesn't actually tell me how exactly they differ from each other. And we know we changed the volume of the milk, but we want to know exactly if that affects how sour the milk's going to get. And we can use a pH scale to make the sourness into a quantitative or number measurement, because the pH scale gives us how acidic or sour our milk is. So I've been writing down our data each day, and it looks alright, but it's just not very organized. So whenever we're writing down our measurements, we want to make sure we have it in a data table. That's our first vocab word for the day. A data table is an organized place to record measurements, or if you can't get measurements, your qualitative observations. The big thing to remember about our data tables is we want to include units. If I just left this as 7 what? We need to make sure we tell and remind ourselves that it's 7 on the pH scale. So the first big thing to remember is that your headers need units. This could be milliliters, grams, degrees, seconds. Whatever your dependent variable is, that needs to be measured in a unit, so make sure you include it. We always have one independent variable in our experiment. In this case, it was our volume of milk that we tried. And so that needs to be in our data table along with any measurements that we might make. That is your next bullet point. It needs one IV and at least one dependent variable, or DV. The last thing. Sometimes, if you have more than one trial, remember a trial is when we repeat something to make sure our results are accurate or reliable. We might have an average. So our last bullet point, it might include averages if there's more than one trial. That's a greater than sign. So that's really all you need to know about tables. The next thing you're going to do is write down what a sample table should look like. So in big lines, on the first column, remember columns go up and down, is almost always the independent variable. And of course, you need to measure something after you change your independent variable. So your DV is the next column. The next thing you're going to draw is the control variable. Sometimes it might tell you what was stayed the same. And in some graphs, you might have another dependent variable. But the two things you absolutely need to have are your IV and your DV. So I'm going to make a table for this experiment, and the last thing you're going to do is copy it down. So the first thing, if I look back at my model table, the first thing I need to do is make sure I have my independent variable. I, C, D, M, that's what I'm changing, so that's going to be my first column. Columns go up and down on my data table. So I'm changing the volume of milk. So in your notebook, your table should look like mine. And I had 3 different volumes, 20 milliliters, 40 milliliters, and 60 milliliters. Notice how I'm including my units. So I remember it's not 20 ounces of milk or 20 gallons of milk. In the next column should always be your dependent variable. Remember, I'm looking at my model to find that. Independent and then your dependent. So, the first thing I measured was the pH on day 1. That's my first dependent variable. And then I noticed that I have the unit. I also measured the pH on the second day. But I also want to make some qualitative observations with words, so I might put smell on day 1. So I can have a quantitative and a qualitative observation on each day. I'm going to continue doing that for each of the days, and then I'm going to re-record my data into the table so that it looks nice. That's how you make a data table. 1 IV, at least 1 DV. Make sure you have units so that we know what you're measuring, and make sure that if there's an average or a control variable, that can also be in there.